Fighters come in probably an hour ago and they were simply treated and released, sprained ankle and dehydration. But no, it's been really slowed down to a trickle at this point, and they said earlier in the day they didn't expect any more. But of course, some people are just arriving on their own, so they're poised and ready for anything. But like you were saying earlier, Gordon, 36 people is not a lot, and the simple fact that traffic made it really difficult for people to get here is something that a lot of people are, going to think about for, any disaster of this kind in the future. Of course, we're all poised for IMF and World Bank. No one can ever imagine something like this happening, something of this magnitude. But we know also from just the sheer disaster of it all that there are more people out there. We're trying to find out exactly where all of them are tonight.
Hey, Jennifer, speaking of World Bank and IMF, the Associated Press is reporting that Mayor Tony Williams is now going to ask, or may ask, the finance organization to delay the meetings, which were set for the 29th and 30th of September. As you know, police and fire organizations were bracing for at least 100,000 protesters in our area. But again, Mayor Williams may ask IMF World Bank to reschedule their meetings. And
Bruce Leshan reported earlier that the organizers of the protest were going to have a meeting to reassess it and maybe even think about calling off their end of the protest. They haven't announced it, but they're going to talk about it.
Right. Well, now, in light of what happened today, the Red Cross has an urgent need for blood donations.
So if you can help out, call 1-800-GIVE-LIFE. Red Cross donation centers will stay open for extended hours tonight. 100-GIVE-LIFE. They really need your blood, not only here but in New York.
4 flights, 2 from United Airlines, 2 from American Airlines, are known to have been involved in the attacks today.
American Flight 77 from Dulles International Airport to Los Angeles hit the Pentagon. American Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles went into the World Trade Center. United Airlines Flight 175 bound from Boston to L.A. also went into the World Trade Center. United Airlines Flight 93 was en route from Newark to San Francisco when it crashed in Pennsylvania. A passenger on board, locked in a bathroom, said, "We have been hijacked" on that flight. The mayor of New York City warns loss of life could be very heavy. Horrendous, I think, was Rudy Giuliani's word. In Lower Manhattan, where the twin towers of the World Trade Center and a third building in the complex have collapsed into rubble.
Stacey Cohen has been watching all of the rescue efforts from our satellite center, and she joins us now with what she knows. Stacey?
Well, Gavir, we just don't have any firm estimates on casualties right now. You know, there were about 50,000 people in those World Trade Center complexes that actually work there, but it's just too early to give you hard and fast numbers. I can tell you what Mayor Rudolph Giuliani is saying. He's saying at least 2,100 people have been injured, 600 taken to hospitals in the Manhattan area by mid-afternoon. Last report, about 150 of those in critical condition. They've got a triage center operating out of Penn Station. You've got the U.S. Navy sending ships to New York that have surgical teams and limited hospital beds. But right now, many of the dead and injured are still trapped in the rubble that was once the World Trade Center. 8:48 a.m., an airplane crashes into Tower 1 of the World Trade Center in New York. 15 minutes later, a second airplane strikes Tower 2 in an unimaginable, unprecedented terrorist attack on America.
Just an explosion. Just a light flash out my window. My whole doorway to entrance to my office blew open. My office was freaking out.
Smoke and fire poured out of the 110-story buildings as police and rescue personnel did their best to evacuate some 50,000 people who worked there. Many on the street watched in horror as desperate people trapped on the upper levels jumped from the building. Others tried to rescue each other as they fled the flaming structures.
There's a woman in a wheelchair, and I got her in the strap wheelchair and just carried her down the steps and carried her down 68 floors, man. And then we got lost on the 5th floor. It was chaos.
And when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, at 10 a.m., Tower 2 collapsed. Everyone on the street below ran for their lives as the city became buried in soot and debris.
Where were you, sir, when that happened?
Right on the street.
What did you see? What did you hear?
It felt like another plane coming. Everybody took cover to run. We ran down the subway, but the dust followed us down there.
A half hour later, Tower 1 gave way, erasing the World Trade Center from the New York City skyline, killing and injuring untold numbers of people. And of course now within the last hour, building number 7 collapsed this afternoon. It houses Solomon Brothers among other businesses. Now that building had been vacated after the attack. It was empty, but that building has collapsed. And of course when you're talking about the casualties, you must of course mention there are 266 people that are confirmed dead on those 4 airlines that were hijacked and obviously went down today. Back to you.
Stacey Cohen in our satellite center. Thank you.
Here's the latest. Explosions can be heard north of Kabul, Afghanistan, in the vicinity of the airport. We also saw pictures there from CNN earlier. Large plumes of smoke can be seen.
These are pictures from CNN that we had
These are
earlier.
live pictures from CNN. At the top of your screen there, you can see that's apparently in the vicinity of the airport. Nick Robertson had reported earlier. This is the seat of the Taliban government of Afghanistan, which has been harboring the acknowledged terrorist Osama bin Laden. The Taliban government had said from its spiritual capital earlier that Osama bin Laden could not have been involved in this. And Jack Kelly has been covering this stuff for USA Today, said, no way, this is just the kind of thing he can, just the kind of operation he can mount.
And, you know, Gordon, earlier today, the President of the United States, President Bush, said that the United States would find whoever was responsible for this, and they would pay the consequences. We're supposed to get a briefing from Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld shortly, and when we do, we will certainly take that live and bring it to you. Now, what happened today, this isn't the first time the World Trade Center has been the target of a terrorist attack. Back in February of 1993, a bomb went off in the basement car park. 6 people were killed, hundreds of others were injured. A blind Muslim cleric named Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman was jailed for plotting the attack, but again, the name that came up in 1993 is the name that's coming up again today, and he was the U.S.'s most notorious and most wanted suspect, Saudi dissident Osama bin Laden.
Who has been given shelter in Afghanistan. Now, in light of today's attacks, this entire region is under a state of emergency. Virginia, Maryland, and Washington, D.C.
And throughout the day, thousands of federal workers have been scrambling to get out of downtown D.C. to get home. Bruce Johnson is now in downtown D.C. with the latest on that. Bruce?
Kavir, Gordon, they're home by now. 340,000 federal workers, about 35,000 D.C. workers all sent home today. State of emergency declared because of the terrorism attacks in New York and at the Pentagon. Take a look at the late edition of the Washington Post. It sums it up. It's on the streets right now. Terrorism hits the Pentagon and the Trade Center. It says this is on the scale of Pearl Harbor. The capital city, the most powerful city in the world, is stunned and staggering this evening. Let's go to the tape.
They told us to just evacuate the building. So, it's unbelievable. Unreal.
Every non-essential federal government worker has been sent home. Private businesses have shut down. The traffic jams that occurred this morning have disappeared, leaving a virtual ghost town.
That's how I heard the second boom.
You heard it when the Pentagon was hit?
Yeah.
What'd you think at the time?
Didn't know. I thought a transformer went off.
This is not something that they can blame on 1 or 2 individual terrorists. I think there's a big organization behind this one, right?
At the Washington Hospital Center burn unit, emergency staff stood by awaiting casualties from the Pentagon.
The medical people took this patient, was intubated and very badly burned.
The D.C. Fire and Ambulance Department made every vehicle and staffer available for the streets here and in Arlington.
Yes,
everybody expects to be used today.
Yes, sir.
Put to work.
Yes, sir.
Okay. In downtown Washington today, everywhere we looked, people were simply stunned.
I'm sick about it. It's awful. It's like a bad movie.
You know, Oklahoma City more than got the attention of the federal workers in this town. After Oklahoma City, they knew federal workers could become a target. After what happened today, they also know that any one of these buildings in the nation's capital could have been targeted today. They know it could have been their building. Gordon Kabir, back to you.
Bruce Johnson, thank you.
Well, Bruce, President Bush plans to address the nation at around 9 this evening. We're, of course, going to bring you his remarks live. Earlier today, here is some of what Mr. Bush had to say about today's terrorist attacks.
I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
The President is expected to arrive at Andrews Air Force Base in a few minutes. We're seeing sites around Washington that we see in other capitals, not here. Guards with automatic weapons patrolling the White House grounds, military aircraft in the skies.
Bruce LeShan is joining us now from 17th and K Streets near the White House. Bruce, what's the situation there right now?
Gravir, we're up atop the U.S. Chamber of Commerce building, and from up here on the rooftop, it looks like a splendid late summer Washington day. But you scratch the surface and you see something far different. You see signs of terror. Take a look at some of the videotape. This pictures of the flag being brought down to half staff at the White House just about 5 o'clock, just about 8 hours after the first plane hit the World Trade Center. All day long, looking back, there have been scenes of chaos on the streets and at the White House.
Folks, you go ahead and step back on the sidewalk. Let's go.
Panic outside the White House. Top staff evacuating. Workers scrambling for cover. Reporters, photographers used to covering the news suddenly part of it. The Secret Service warns of an unidentified low-flying plane and orders everyone out.
People were at first thinking, let's get pictures of this, and then we started, when the news came out that the Pentagon had been crashed, and we heard a bomb, but people started getting scared. And it's the first time I've seen journalists scared and running.
The seat of power of the most powerful nation on earth is nearly empty. Heavily armed Secret Service officers cordon off access for 2 blocks in every direction.
I mean, you really, you think that it might happen someday, but it's really happened now, and it's scary. I mean, I'm sitting down there in the garage, and you're thinking, are they going to bomb where the whole garage is going to come down?
On the streets, an evacuation worse than any snowstorm. It's gridlock on the street and impossible to get into the parking garages.
Some of the people that had monthly parking were able to get down and get their own keys, but as you can see, nothing's moving here.
Who would want to kill all these people that they killed in New York? It's just terrible.
Can you get out?
I'm 4 levels down. I came up to breathe because it's so hot down there.
Up until now, one of the biggest security concerns here at the White House has been the upcoming IMF World Bank demonstrations. But now, as we take a look at some videotape, we understand from Lisa Fithian from the Mobilization for Global Justice, one of the umbrella groups that is involved in organizing the protests at the upcoming World Bank IMF meetings, says that they are reevaluating, that there will be an emergency meeting of organizers tomorrow, and there is some possibility that they may call off the demonstrations. Gordon Gravir, back to you at Broadcast House.
Bruce LeShan, I understand Mayor Williams.
Yeah, the Associated Press is reporting that Mayor Williams is may ask the financial organization to postpone or cancel its meetings here in D.C., which are now set for the 29th and 30th of September.
The purpose of terrorism is to terrorize and paralyze. All financial markets closed today. New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, Chicago Board of Trade, heightened monitoring of bridges and dams. United Nations buildings evacuated. Major League Baseball postponed. New York City's mayor primary election is postponed. And now all U.S. airports were closed almost immediately for the first time in history following those attacks on the Pentagon and the World Trade Center. Federal authorities cleared U.S. airspace, ordering planes in flight to land right away. Gary Reels is at National.
Gordon and Gravir National Airport has been closed, shut down. The roadblock is about the only thing still up and running here. We're at the south perimeter of the airport. Again, the entire airport operation evacuated around 10 o'clock this morning. We are told by the FAA that the airport, and this is not just National Airport, it's Dulles and every other single airport in the United States, will not operate at least before noon tomorrow. No airport operations. A lot of international flights heading into the United States are being diverted to other destinations around Canada and elsewhere. Again, relatives of people traveling internationally into the United States will probably be hearing from their relatives or from the airlines. But again, no airport operations in this country before noon tomorrow. Back to you.
Gary Reels, thank you very much. What a day this has been. It started shortly before 9 o'clock this morning. 4 planes hijacked in our area from 3 different airports, 2 of those hitting the World Trade Center.
Eastern Standard Time.
2 towers collapsing there at the World Trade Center, and then a 3rd building collapsing just a short while ago, the U.S. Pentagon being hit.
Barbara Olson, the wife of the U.S. Solicitor General, was on the airplane that hit the Pentagon. She called her husband from the airplane, said our plane is being hijacked.
By knife-wielding hijackers. Also, the United States believes that Osama bin Laden may be behind what happened here in the United States today.
Which is being denied by the Taliban rulers in Afghanistan.
Still, in Afghanistan, we are getting reports now, and you watch CNN, of fire in the skies there.
Okay, that's it. The CBS Evening News is next. We'll see you again at 11 here on Channel 9 Eyewitness News.
A stunning and cowardly strike on the United States. Terrorists send mighty skyscrapers crumbling to the ground. Many innocent people are dead. The president vows the killers will pay for this attack on America. September 11th, 2001. You will remember this day as long as you live. Good evening again. This is CBS News continuing coverage of the attack on America. A series of coordinated terror strikes today at this country, its people, our freedom. Strikes that came without warning. 4 U.S. commercial jetliners were hijacked. 2 crashed into the World Trade Center here in New York City and sent the giant twin towers filled with workers crumbling to the ground. A 3rd hijacked airliner slammed into the seat of American military power, the Pentagon. The 4th hijacked airliner, target unknown, but possibly a target intended in or near Washington, went down in southwestern Pennsylvania. Here's what's happening at this hour. As the evening goes on and night begins to fall in New York and Washington, brave rescue workers are searching desperately for victims in the rubble of the World Trade Center towers and a 3rd building around the World Trade Center that also collapsed. 50,000 people generally work in the World Trade Center. A count of the dead still a long way off. Emergency operations are also continuing at the scene of the crisis at the Pentagon in Pennsylvania. There were well over 250 people on the 4 crashed planes. In contrast to the chaos on the ground, the skies are eerily quiet because the FAA has grounded all civilian aircraft at least until noon tomorrow. There is unprecedented security around the leadership of the U.S. government. President George W. Bush will address the nation from Washington, we're now told, at 9 Eastern Time this evening. And that will be roughly 2.5 hours from now. The president will address the nation. The president has put the U.S. military on high alert worldwide. President Bush vowed that the United States will find and punish whoever's behind what he described as, quote, these cowardly acts. Early speculation, underscore the word speculation, centers on Osama bin Laden. We have mobilized the full resources of CBS News to bring you clear, accurate coverage of this day that will live in infamy. CBS News correspondents and producers are deployed throughout the country and around the world. We began here in New York City, ground zero for the attack on America. This day's horrific events began with the familiar turbine whine of jet engines over New York City, but this Boeing 767 was too low and not in the regular flight pattern. It was aimed straight for the massive twin towers of the World Trade Center. CBS's Byron Pitts is on the scene tonight. Byron?
Dan, without exaggeration, this part of Manhattan looks like a battlefield. We have seen blood. We have seen body parts. We have watched people die in front of our eyes. This was terrorism like we in America have never seen before. 8:48 a.m. Mayhem in Manhattan.
We saw a plane coming very low, and everyone said, wow, that plane is very, very low. Come on, guys, keep moving. I was walking to work, and all of a sudden, I see a jet crash into the first tower.
An American Airlines flight loaded with 92 people crashes head-on into the North Tower of the World Trade Center.
And then we heard the crash. We ran to the window.
Into the building. It went into the Trade Center.
We hit the Trade Center. We saw the shrapnel fall, and then we said, get out.
And minutes later.
There's another one. Another plane just hit. Right. Oh, my God. Another plane has just hit.
I heard a roar, and I looked around thinking that it had to be a helicopter, and I looked up, and I saw the second plane hit.
A second commercial plane, a United Airlines jet, also hijacked, carrying 65 people, plows into the South Tower.
First one we thought was an accident. When we heard there was a second one, we definitely thought it was terrorism.
On the ground, witnesses could not believe their eyes. 70 stories up with the building burning, reason gave way to desperation. New York's bravest never had a chance.
We really never even got to that close to the building. An explosion blew and it knocked everybody over.
Less than an hour later, the South Tower came crumbling down.
It collapsed. The top floors collapsed down. I saw it blow and then ran like hell. Thank God. I'm 69, but I can still run.
But it was far from over.
Tower 2 collapsed into Tower 1. Within minutes after that, we were ordered out.
When the dust settled, signs of life started to emerge.
Chaos. It's just chaos out here. It really is. So the Twin Towers fall. It's amazing. It's crazy. I can't believe this shit is happening. I really can't. It's a nightmare. It's Armageddon right here.
This was the worst act of terrorism on U.S. soil, but not the first attack on the World Trade Center. 8 years ago, terrorists set off bombs in the basement in an effort to take down the two towers. They failed. Today, mission accomplished.
I tell you what, it's a sad day for America. It really is.
By 2 o'clock this afternoon, firefighters and police officers and paramedics by the hundreds stood by, many of them feeling helpless. There was nothing they could do at this point because the building was still unsecured.
Our main priority is to get in, do a search and rescue, look for survivors, and then clean up what's left. And we can't do that until the building is deemed safe.
Ankle deep in debris and despair, rescue workers waited. Some had relatives of their own inside. One police officer told me her sister worked here on the 40th floor, due in at 9 a.m. She was always early, she said. Always. A sign on a paramedic's van spoke volumes.
We're going to do the best that we can to get people out of there, get into the hospital, get back in line, go back out there and do it again.
New York Port Authority Police Chief William Hall choked back tears. For him, this was no longer just work. On a personal level, because I know that these are all your men and it's a business, but I'm sure that a lot of these guys are your friends. How you holding up?
It's not a business now, it's personal now.
Sir?
It's personal now. We have to get them.
Back live, we have had little relief here. Take a look at this. About an hour ago, World Trade Center building number 7 collapsed. A 42-story building, weakened by the devastation that had occurred earlier today. No word on any casualties in the building. It was the one calamity that was not a surprise. Police had evacuated the area hours ago. Fearful building number 7 would indeed fall down. This morning when the first tower collapsed, I was standing about 3 blocks away with CBS News correspondent Mika Brzezinski. As the fireball rolled toward us, Mika grabbed her shoes, I grabbed her hand, and we ran like hell. Thousands did. Dan, except for a few sirens, I have never heard New York City this quiet. Graveyard quiet. Dan?
Fire in pits in lower Manhattan. When the first World Trade Center building was hit, rescue workers rushed to it. We're now told that some of those rescue workers died as the second World Trade Center building was hit and eventually the 2 buildings collapsed. Now about today's other terror strike at the seat and symbol of U.S. military power, the U.S. Defense Department, the Pentagon. There were 64 people aboard American Flight 77, the jetliner hijackers used to ram into the Pentagon. CBS News' David Martin reports the deadly impact there. David?
Dan, as you can see behind me, the Pentagon is still smoldering from that direct hit it suffered this morning, but it's finally cooled down enough so that rescue workers can begin the task of recovering the dead and wounded. One early count put the number of dead at 20, but no one expects it to stop there. The first attack ever on the Pentagon occurred at 9:38 a.m. Eastern Time.
Clip this ball over here, hit another ball and slammed right into the building. Huge explosion, and then utter pandemonium, as you might imagine. I mean, everybody was screaming, "Oh my God."
A hijacked American Airlines jet, which had just taken off from Dulles Airport, flew right up the main highway leading north into Washington and straight into the citadel of American military power.
There was no doubt about it. It was American Airlines slammed right into the building, and there was no doubt about it. Whoever was piloting that plane was aiming for the Pentagon.
Fearful that, like the World Trade Center, a second airliner was on its way, most of the building's 23,000 workers fled.
Plane's coming in. Come on. Let's go. Come on. We're not playing around here. Let's go.
F-16 fighters circled overhead looking for a second attack, but the damage had already been done. The plane had drilled a hole about a third of the way through the world's largest office building. The wounded were rushed to nearby hospitals as the fire spread and an entire section of the building collapsed, trapping many, many more inside.
Arlington search and rescue personnel are just now, and it's about almost 2 o'clock, just now gaining access to portions of the building where the plane hit because the fires were too intense.
One ray of hope. The Pentagon is undergoing a major renovation, and some of the offices in the path of the plane were vacant.
We're trying to find out who made it out okay and account for the people that may not have made it out.
When the plane hit, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld dashed from his office on the other side of the building.
And proceeded down towards the impact point in the building. It actually went outside the building and was helpful in getting several people that were injured onto stretchers, and then came back into the building and was in the National Military Command Center.
With smoke hanging in the air of the command center, Rumsfeld ordered aircraft carriers, amphibious ships, cruisers and destroyers to New York and Washington, where they can serve as floating hospitals, help with the cleanup, and provide air defense against the possibility of more attacks. Rescue efforts are a long way from over, but the FBI is already combing the debris for clues to who was behind this. The Pentagon has put all its bases on the highest state of alert, and the State Department has done the same thing with American embassies around the world. The early suspicion is that Osama bin Laden was behind this, and U.S. officials say eventually there will be military retaliation. Dan?
David Martin reporting live from the Pentagon. President Bush is just reported to have landed at Andrews Air Force Base just outside of Washington. He is said to be going to the White House itself. From there, he will address the American people tonight. We will see and hear it, of course, live on CBS News. As regards the explosions in Kabul, Afghanistan, a senior Pentagon official now says, and I quote him, "That is not a U.S. strike." Repeat, not a U.S. strike. This despite reports from the scene by at least one reporter on the scene who said that it was a missile strike. A senior Pentagon official says that it's simply not true. It wasn't a U.S. strike. Now, to punish those behind today's attacks, the United States and its people must first determine who they are. We are a country that believes in facts and the pursuit of facts. The facts are few about who's responsible for this. There has been much speculation, italicize, underscore the word speculation about that today, with Osama bin Laden, the renegade Saudi millionaire, frequently mentioned. No one knows who did this. CBS's Jim Stewart in Washington is following the investigation, checking his sources, and has this live report. Jim.
Dan, apparently we have a little bit more now than just speculation. U.S. intelligence officials and law enforcement no longer have just a theory about today's unprecedented attack. They now have some evidence, and it all points to Osama bin Laden. Sources tell CBS News that hours after the attack, intelligence agents detected what one official is calling significant indicators that the suicide planes were hijacked by members of al-Qaeda, the terrorist group that reports to bin Laden. Sources describe the intelligence as communications intercepts, but would not provide any details. It's not definitive, said one official, but it is persuasive.
Sensing that bin Laden would quickly become a suspect, Afghanistan's ruling Taliban party, which has been giving him safe refuge, called a press conference. We do not allow Osama bin Laden to operate from our land, the Taliban said, warning the U.S. not to take any, quote, speedy actions to retaliate. Meanwhile, law enforcement sources said there had been no credible claims for the joint attacks and that intelligence had picked up no specific threats aimed at targets inside the United States before the attacks took place. Within minutes of today's attacks, officials were pointing to the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center by a group with ties to bin Laden, citing it as proof that bin Laden has never given up on his dream to destroy the symbol of America's economic power. And in recent months, analysts say bin Laden has only become more and more sophisticated in his attempts to strike at the United States. They point specifically to his simultaneous attack on 2 U.S. embassies in East Africa.
They also went directly against a U.S. destroyer, which was heavily guarded, and they did put a hole in that ship, the USS Cole. So they have a track record of conducting attacks that one would think they might not be capable of.
Late today, the U.S. intelligence community was rapidly sorting through a priority list of potential suspects within the U.S. for electronic eavesdropping, with sources saying the number may reach into the hundreds.
There is also specific physical evidence that investigators are eager to examine. First are the transcripts of communications between the suicide aircraft and ground controllers, and second are cockpit tape recordings of conversations in the doomed aircraft themselves. The working theory is that the hijackers were pilots themselves and forcefully took over the controls to dive the jets straight into their targets. Dan?
Jim Stewart, good work with getting that new information about increasing evidence, real hard evidence, nothing conclusive yet, that bin Laden is tied to this. But do U.S. intelligence officials know where bin Laden is? Still in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Baluchistan? Do they have any idea?
As recently as the beginning of the week, they had reason to believe that he was hanging out in the two locations that he has most frequently been at in Afghanistan, and that's the cities of Jalalabad and Kandahar. Now, he travels frequently, Dan, and he does so by SUV and caravans with sometimes as many as 100 guards. It's a safe bet that he is on the move again tonight.
United States Secretary of Defense, thank you, Jim Stewart. U.S. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld has begun a briefing at the Pentagon. We pick it up in progress live.
Ladies and gentlemen, as the Secretary just said, today we have watched the tragedy of an outrageous act of barbaric terrorism carried out by fanatics against both civilians and military people. Acts that have killed and maimed many innocent and decent citizens of our country. I extend my condolences to the entire Department of Defense families, military and civilian, and to the families of all those throughout our nation who lost loved ones. I think this is indeed a reminder of the tragedy and the tragic dangers that we face day in and day out, both here at home as well as abroad. I would tell you up front, I have no intentions of discussing today what comes next, but make no mistake about it, your armed forces are ready.
Mr. Chairman. Chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Carl Levin.
Our intense focus on recovery and helping the injured and the families of those who were killed is matched only by our determination to prevent more attacks and matched only by our unity to track down, root out, and relentlessly pursue terrorists, states that support them, and harbor them. They are the common enemy of the civilized world. Our institutions are strong, and our unity is palpable.
Senator John Warner.
Thank you. As a past chairman preceding Carl Levin, I can assure you that the Congress stands behind our president, and the president speaks with one voice for this entire nation. This is indeed the most tragic hour in America's history, and yet I think it can be its finest hour, as our president and those with him, most notably our Secretary of Defense, our chairman, and the men and women of the armed forces all over this world stand ready not only to defend this nation and our allies against further attack, but to take such actions as are directed in the future in retaliation for this terrorist act. A series of terrorist acts unprecedented in world history. We call upon the entire world to step up and help, because terrorism is a common enemy to all, and we're in this together. The United States has borne the brunt, but who can be next? Step forward and let us hold accountable and punish those that have perpetrated this attack. Again, I commend the Secretary, the Chairman, and how proud we are. We spoke with our President here moments ago. He's got a firm grip on this situation, and the Secretary and the General have a firm grip on our armed forces and in communication of the world over.
Thank you very much. We'll take a few questions and then we'll adjourn. Charlie.
Mr. Secretary, did you have any inkling at all, in any way, that something of this nature and something of this scope might be planned?
Charlie, we don't discuss intelligence matters.
I see. And how would you respond if you find out who did this?
Obviously, the President of the United States has spoken on that subject, and those are issues that he will address in good time.
Mr.
Yes.
Secretary, we are getting reports from CNN and others that there are bombs exploding in Kabul, Afghanistan. Are we at the moment striking back, and if so, is the target Osama bin Laden and his organization?
I've seen those reports. They, in no way is the United States government connected to those explosions.
What about Osama bin Laden? Do you suspect him as the prime suspect in this?
It's not the time for discussions like that.
A show of bipartisan support and solidarity at the Pentagon with Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld orchestrating this bipartisan appearance by members of Congress and General Hugh Shelton, the chairman of the Military Joint Chiefs of Staff in Washington. That'll go on for a bit, but the Secretary of Defense never noted for talking a lot on this crisis circumstances, making it clear he wasn't going to say a lot about what's going on. President Bush condemned the terrorist attacks. He vowed to bring those responsible to justice when it is determined who did it. The president is now back in Washington, headed at last report for the White House itself. He intends to address the nation from Washington this evening. We expect that at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. That'd be 8 Central, and of course 6 p.m. On the West Coast. CBS News Chief White House Correspondent John Roberts has the latest. John?
Dan, even as the president makes his way back to the White House, the administration is still trying to come to grips with the scope of this tragedy. Secret Service sources tell CBS News that this indeed was just like Pearl Harbor. There was nothing on their threat assessment, no warning that this was coming.
The president was in Florida when word of the attacks first broke. Reading with a group of elementary students, Mr. Bush was stopped cold when his chief of staff delivered the news.
Move everybody across the street.
Moments later, in Washington, an urgent call to evacuate the White House.
I'm told that a plane went into the Pentagon and they're chasing us off the grounds here.
It was an extraordinary scene as staff and the press corps were rushed from the grounds. If the Pentagon had been targeted, the Secret Service feared the president's home could be next.
Get everybody back. Everybody back.
Fire trucks took up positions on Pennsylvania Avenue, while SWAT teams stood vigil from the roof. Police sealed off a 2-block area around the White House. The only ones left inside the mansion, the vice president and his national security team, coordinating a response to the crisis from the Situation Room. With a continuing threat in Washington, the Secret Service would not allow the president to return and had him fly immediately to the security of Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward.
The full scope of the tragedy now apparent, Mr. Bush addressed the nation and vowed these acts of terrorism will not stand.
Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
From Barksdale, the president headed for Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, home of the Strategic Air Command, where he conferred with his national security staff about how to proceed. Confident that the White House had been secured, he then headed back for Washington, determined to send a signal to the world that America would stand strong in the face of these horrible acts.
And Dan, some more tough talk tonight from the president ahead of his address to the nation. A report just filed from aboard Air Force One. His spokesman, quoting the president, is saying, "We will find these people and they will suffer the consequences of taking on this nation. We will do what it takes. No one is going to diminish the spirit of this nation." Dan?
John Roberts in Washington Live. John, what's the security situation at the White House at this moment?
Well, Dan, the White House is still locked down. We are not allowed back in. There is a small crew that's been allowed back in to tape the president live tonight at 9 o'clock. You can see the helicopters are just starting to arrive on the south lawn of the White House. Dan, as a security precaution, Air Force One, which is always shadowed by fighter jets wherever it travels, was more than shadowed today. On its way back from Nebraska, there was an F-15 positioned on each wing. And even now, Dan, every once in a while, we hear a fighter jet flying combat air patrol, if you will, over Washington, D.C., something this nation never thought they would see happen. Again, the president just now arriving back at the White House. We'll hear from him later on tonight.
at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. Thanks, John Roberts. One of the few things that seems certain tonight is that these hijackings and attacks were meticulously planned and carried out with great precision. It also took a lot of money to do it. All of that is strongly supported by hard facts now at hand. CBS News correspondent Bob Orr, who covers aviation for us, has pieced it together. Bob?
Well, Dan, there's no doubt at all it was a highly coordinated attack, launched with simultaneous breaches of security at 3 of the nation's busiest airports this morning. Under the cover of the hectic morning rush hour, when airports are particularly vulnerable, hijackers boarded 4 large passenger jets, 2 each from American Airlines and United Airlines, 2 of the strongest symbols of U.S. aviation.
American Flight 11, a Boeing 767, took off first at 7:45 this morning from Boston bound for Los Angeles. 13 minutes later, another 767, United Flight 175, also left Boston for L.A. At virtually the same moment, United Flight 93, a 757, took off from Newark for San Francisco. And to the south at Washington's Dulles Airport, another 757, American Flight 77, flew off towards Los Angeles. The first sign that anything was wrong was noticed by air traffic controllers, who watched the jets stray from their planned routes. This computerized radar path shows how the first plane, American Airlines Flight 11, climbed out of Boston and, as expected, headed northwest across Massachusetts. But watch what happened. As the plane entered eastern New York, it turned sharply to the south and headed straight for Manhattan. The 767 hit the World Trade Center at 8:48 this morning. And 16 minutes later, United Flight 175 delivered the second blow. The jets, fueled for cross-country flights, were filled with tens of thousands of gallons of volatile fuel. They were literally flying bombs, each with an explosive power far greater than the blast that leveled the Oklahoma City Federal Building. Based on radio communications from the planes, FAA authorities knew they were dealing with a terrorist attack and immediately moved to close New York and Washington airports. And for the first time in U.S. history, all flights across the country were grounded.
The airport's being evacuated. They need to go home.
But there were still 2 hijacked jets in the air, and one of them, American Airlines Flight 77,